All right. Yeah. So today we're going to be drawing conclusions in social studies. So it's Unit 3, Lesson 8, and it is again something we've encountered with language arts. Um, it's going to be very similar to making inferences. It's like basically, drawing on those inferences that you make, and sort of positing a bigger inference about the entire reading that you're doing. Let's take a look here. We'll get into it. Maybe if it opens for me. I think it's time for me to restart my computer. I do that after class, I think. Things starting to slow down a little bit.
So were we done with the main idea and details one?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I didn't finish it. I'm looking like, okay, I'm missing something of mine.
Main ideas.
Yeah, the lesson 3, unit 2.
Unit 2, lesson 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me see.
Okay. Let's see if this opens down. All right, here we go. No, still not opening. Give it a second here, see if it pops up. Okay, now we got it. Yeah, so today will be, by the time we complete the lesson today, we'll be able to draw conclusions by combining several inferences and use prior knowledge to help you draw conclusions. So taking, some of the historical knowledge that we've dealt with, some of the events and things that we've already seen to help us make those conclusions, what we know about, things like checks and balances within the government, or the presidency itself, and different offices and things like that. So as we get into it, you'll see how this works. And here's our audio.
You have already learned that an inference is a logical guess based on facts or evidence. By combining several inferences to make a judgment, you can draw conclusions. The ability to draw conclusions enables you to develop new ideas about social studies material. In this way, you can gain a deeper understanding of the information you need. You can also call upon your prior knowledge to help you draw conclusions. As with other areas of the GED test, questions about drawing conclusions will test your ability to interpret information at various depth of knowledge levels through the use of complex reading skills and thinking skills.
And this is one way that humanity, so history or certain fields of social science, geography, even like language arts, they differ from your STEM classes, like your math and science, right? Because math and science, you work with, you test a hypothesis to come to your conclusion. There's more sort of solid proof if something works or doesn't. Same thing with math. There's ways to check your answers to see if it's correct, and you get very definitive answers most of the time, not always. And even in certain fields of geography or social science, you get that because you work with a lot of numbers. But in something like history, you have to use a lot of information, and you have to use your prior knowledge, and you have to use evidence to make a conclusion. So instead of just being able to work through a problem, you have to sort through a lot of information, and that's how you wind up coming to a conclusion. And that's why I work for an organization called RAND for a couple summers. They do a lot of policy for the government, a lot of military stuff. And I work with a lot of other PhD students who were in science fields and math fields. And they're talking about their dissertation for their PhD. And it's about, 150 pages that they've written, because they create a lot of the evidence that they use. rather than having to go find it. Whereas as a historian, I have to go find my information in archives and look through, all these different type of primary sources. So their dissertations are about 150 pages or so. Mine is more like 3 times that size. It's going to be like 350 to 400 pages because I have to collect a lot more information to base my conclusions on. And it's more than just working through a math problem or a science problem. Not that that's easy, but the way that you present your data and your findings is a lot different when it comes to writing it. And this is really important to when we get to writing, that you understand about drawing conclusions and using your evidence. So keep in mind, down the road when we get to some more of our writing exercises, and we're going to have another short one today, that's really where this comes into play, with the idea of writing your conclusions, actually, not just answering a question, but actually coming up with your own conclusion that you're going to write. So our first passage, talking about the Constitution. When the Constitution was written, its authors left much of the responsibility for how the new government would be structured to Congress to decide. One of the most pressing issues of business was determining the order of succession in the unfortunate event that anything should happen to the president, which we've talked about, right? Who takes over if something happens to the president? We looked at the table of the order of succession. The Second Continental Congress acted by passing the Presidential Succession Act, which places the vice president in charge if the president cannot serve. In its original form, the act placed the president pro temp of the Senate first in line after the vice president, with the Speaker of the House second. Both of these are elected positions. And you could think of the president pro temp as like the vice president of the Senate. The vice president, the literal vice president, serves as sort of the president. He oversees all of the all of the Senate activities, and then the pro temp would be the guy or woman under him. And then next, so the line of succession has been changed twice since then. First, in 1866, it was changed so that the president's cabinet members who are appointed by the president were to serve in order of rank after the vice president. The House Speaker and President pro temp were no longer in line. The logic was that no president pro temp had ever served as president, whereas 6 former secretaries of state had. In 1947, the line of succession has changed to its current form. If the president dies, the vice president is next in line, followed by the Speaker of the House and President pro temp, and then the cabinet members. So what it says here at our little A text box, as you read, look for pieces of information about which you can ask questions, such as how do the people in the line of succession get their positions? So that's something we talked about, the line of succession, right? Who takes over, but how did that form and why? Why that order? It seems logical to us if we just say, well, yeah, vice president's going to take over, but who's next? Why those particular individuals? And then underlined here, it says appointed by the president. So remember that an inference is like a puzzle that must be put together using 2 or more pieces of information. So these logical guesses can then be combined to form a larger conclusion. So, they mentioned things like elected positions. So your president pro temp is a senator, so he was elected. The Speaker of the House is a U.S. representative. They are elected. The cabinet members are appointed officials. So in a democratic society, you would want elected officials in that order of succession because those were chosen by the people, not the president. And nowadays, the vice president campaigns with the president. So you really are sort of electing both, if you think about it. And in some cases, the vice president has, probably affected the outcome of an election. either being elected because people like them, or being someone that nobody wanted near any type of authority, like maybe Sarah Palin. But anyway, so that is what we're going to be looking at, using some larger passages here to make some conclusions. So making assumptions, right? To answer this question, make assumptions based on the information given. Look for information about how the cabinet members, President Pro Temp, and House Speaker differ. All right. So, Christiana, would you like to read question 1 for us?
Okay. What conclusion can you draw as to the reason the line of succession was most likely changed in 1947, placing cabinet members behind the Speaker of the House and President pro tempus? Is it tempus?
Yep, just pro temp. That's fine.
A, the cabinet members are not allowed to are not allowed equally are not all equally qualified to become president. B, the House Speaker is more qualified than members of the cabinet to become president. C, the president pro tempore is more qualified than the members of cabinet to become president. D, the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem are selected officially, and the cabinet members are appointed as by the president. Is it D?
Yeah, D is a dog. Yeah. So yeah, so that's some of the logic and reasoning that has went back and forth in the debates here, right? So early on, they were thinking about, well, the cabinet members would be good because we've had a number of former Secretary of States that have been president. Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State. John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State. There's all these people, particularly early on. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Colin Powell, Secretary of State. They were not, did not become president, but there have been a number that were. So it would make sense to put them in the line, and maybe we're going to put them near the top. But then there's another, school of thought. It's like, well, even though they work in the cabinet, they've been appointed by the president was elected, they themselves were not elected. And if we're going to be a democracy, if something were happening to the president, should we not have other individuals that were elected to serve in that role because, of our democratic process? So, now we have the president, of course, the vice president, then the Speaker of the House, then the President pro temp, and then followed by that, the cabinet members in order, sort of, I guess you could say in order of importance. But yeah, so that's our current system. And D is in dog for number 1. Okay, so this is our little writing practice here. So what I want to do first, and if you come up to, on your exam, or just generally speaking, if there's a written answer, right? If there's a long form answer, like you need to write a paragraph or something, read the question first, so that way you know what you need to look for in the passage that you're reading. So what it says here for our question, what can you conclude about presidential power to seize private property prior to 1952? In your response, develop an argument about President Truman's actions and the subsequent rulings made by the U.S. Supreme Court. Incorporate relevant and specific evidence from the passage and from your own knowledge of the enduring issue. And of course, on an exam, this would probably take you about 25 minutes. So I'm going to read through it here, and I want you to look for evidence. Read along with me. Look for evidence about things like presidential power to seize private property. What about the rulings made by the U.S. Supreme Court? So keep in mind, that's what we're looking for, that we need to incorporate into our answer, okay? So here we go. Attempting to avoid a nationwide strike of steel workers that he believed would jeopardize national defense, President Harry S. Truman issued an executive order in April 1952 to seize and operate most of the nation's steel mills. This order was not based upon any specific statutory authority, but rather upon powers vested in the president by the U.S. Constitution and laws of the United States. The Secretary of Commerce issued the order, and the president promptly reported these events to Congress. However, Congress took no action, stating that their order was neither sanctioned by the Constitution nor by U.S. laws. Since no statute expressly or implicitly authorized the president to take possession of steel mills, Congress correctly stated that the power that President Truman sought to exercise was the lawmaking power, which the U.S. Constitution grants only to Congress. The steel companies sued in U.S. District Court, which ruled that Truman's actions were unconstitutional. It issued a preliminary injunction restraining the order from being carried out. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the decision. So, what it's talking about here, there was, of course, in the early 1950s, we were in the Korean War. So, and just generally speaking, if steel mill workers went on strike, that's really going to interrupt our economic activity, because steel was so important. It was really important for the Korean War, and yada yada yada. Harry Truman wanted to intervene. He was going to basically take control of U.S. steel mills and keep everything working. But of course, that because of Congress saying that he didn't have that power, that was part of lawmaking power, which would fall under Congress, right? Because Congress is the one who makes laws. And then the private owners of the steel mills, sued Truman to stop that action. So that was district court said that Truman couldn't do that, and then that was upheld by the Supreme Court. So we need to roll that into a written answer. So let's start with, now what we see here, right, is checks and balances, right? We see the executive branch attempting to use a power, and we have the other branches of government getting involved, and then we see the Supreme Court that's going to prohibit the president from doing that by ruling that it's unconstitutional. So this passage shows an example of the system of, if I spell that right, system of checks and balances. And that's basically our argument, right? Moving forward, we can show evidence where everything that took place here was a system of checks and balances. So, well, let's add this: checks and balances within the U.S. federal government. President Truman. Well, let's see, President Truman's attempt to seize and operate most of U.S. Steel mills was, let's see here. Well, it was questioned by Congress, right? They didn't believe that he had that power, that it fell under the legislative branch. So, and that's our evidence too, right? So we're directly linking this up with what was written. So we saw that as evidence. President Truman attempted to seize and operate most of U.S. steel mills. Was questioned by Congress. Congress believed this type of power belonged to the lawmaking branch. Let's see here. Let's take another look. So the steel companies sued Truman to prevent the seizure, and U.S. Is that capitalized district court? Yeah, U.S. district courts or district court ruled his actions were unconstitutional. The Supreme Court later upheld the decision. Truman's executive order was based on presidential powers prior to 1952, which allowed the president to seize property. All right. So that's basically everything we need there, right? So first off, we basically have an argument. This passage shows an example of the system of checks and balances within the U.S. federal government. Then we get into what happened. So President Truman's attempt to seize and operate most of U.S. steel mills was questioned by Congress, right? He tried to do that. The legislative branch says, wait a minute, we don't really have anything to say about it, but we do believe that that's a lawmaking action. So Congress believed this type of power belonged to the lawmaking branch. The steel companies sued Truman to prevent the seizure, and U.S. District Court ruled his actions were unconstitutional, right? So the private owners of the steel mills got involved, said he can't do this, and the district court agreed with them. So then the Supreme Court later upheld the decision. So then it went on up to, the highest court of the land. They also ruled it to be unconstitutional. And, the reason Truman thought he could do this was prior to 1952, he had the power as president to seize private property. So if we look at our question, right, we can say, we conclude about presidential power to seize private property. Well, we conclude that he believed that he could do that because he had the ability to seize property prior to 1952. And then we, show that this is a series of checks and balances. And we outline, what was the ruling of the Supreme Court. So all of that shows specific evidence. We don't get too far out into things that don't come out of the passage, right? Everything that we put there in our conclusion is found right there in that passage. All right. How's everybody doing? If you've been able to copy that down, anybody need extra time?
I need a little bit more time.
Okay, go ahead. And that will be the quiz, right? We only had the 2 questions. One was D as in dog. 2 is our written passage. And then we'll do the workbook, which is going to be all multiple choice. This will be the only writing exercise today. And that's the thing too, I mentioned this before, conclusions, inferences, things like that. If you're writing, we talked about this in summary, right? Same thing kind of falls into play for conclusions. Your conclusions shouldn't be longer than your, the body of text that you read. You want to try to make it succinct, go right to the points, add your evidence, make an argument if that's what it's asking you for, provide the evidence, and then, make sure you hit all those points. And if you need to, make sure that you're referencing the question again as you're writing. Here's real easy because we can have that question at the top and we can look at our answer. And also if you need to review the text, you just keep going back and forth. You just let me know when you're finished, Etta.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Okay.
I'm on the last sentence. Okay.
All right. So we'll move on over to the workbook. And there's a little answers here. And as you finish this up, you can look, and just like we saw before, there's a grading rubric. So how do you get full points on an answer like this? You can review those and take a look. And when we get closer to when we're going to be doing more extended writing exercises, I'm going to help you with that. I'll give you guys some writing prompts to do, and you can submit them to me over email, and I'll take a look at them and make some comments and corrections and things and give them back to you. So there's going to be lots of opportunities to get some writing in if you want it. Okay, and moving on to the workbook. So recall that an inference is a logical guess based on facts or evidence. So how we draw conclusions, you read the entire selection and put together the inferences you make as you read. So you, in those situations where the question's coming, think about what evidence is important here, start thinking about your judgments, your reasoning, and work on the conclusion as you go. Think about those inferences using your prior knowledge and all of the facts in the selection, and then you make a judgment. An effective conclusion should express a new idea or realization about a piece of information that is not expressed directly in the piece itself. Verify that your conclusions take the information presented further than that which has already been expressed. And, that's sort of the important thing about history, the study of history. Historical events don't necessarily change, right? We know certain things happened, when they happened, who was involved. The way we think about history, though, changes, right? It's constantly sort of evolving, and that's because people draw new conclusions. Every once in a while, there might be a new piece of evidence that comes along that we insert into history that helps us think about it differently. Or as new people study the same historical events, they have a new perspective, and they'll take that evidence and make new conclusions. So that's the thing here is it's that's why it's original. Every historian has a little bit of a different perspective and their own take, and together that flushes out how we think about past events and why their importance. So that's all about drawing conclusions. All right, on to our workbook and talking about President Roosevelt. So the Executive Office of the President, or EOP, was created in 1939 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The current EOP employs more than 1,800 people. The Executive Office of the President employs 1,800 people. The EOP is overseen by the White House Chief of Staff and is the organization in which many of the president's closest advisors work. Some advisors must be approved by Congress, but most are simply appointed by the president. These advisors oversee individual departments and offices that vary in size and number depending on the needs of the current president. Some of these offices were formed by Congress, and others were created as the president needed them. In addition to the visible parts of the EOP, such as the White House Communications Office, there are several offices responsible for maintaining the White House and providing logistic support for the president. The White House Military Office is responsible for Air Force One, while the Office of Presidential Advance prepares remote sites for the president's arrival when traveling. So, this all occurred under Roosevelt. Not that, there wasn't people working in the White House before Roosevelt, but he expanded the role of the president. We talked about things like the New Deal, and he really did sort of expand the power of the executive branch. And in doing so, he needed more people working. So what it says at the top here in box A, President Franklin Roosevelt served during World War II. Think about the additional responsibilities laid upon a president's shoulders during wartime to help you draw conclusions. And he traveled. He went to conferences and met with Stalin and Churchill and about World War II. So that was something, and you had to have staff to take care of that. There's so much going on at that time, and now it's just again, you think about the people that are going to be working in the White House, and every day, that's a bustling place with a lot going on. And then our second box here, box B, it says use prior knowledge to help you draw conclusions. The president travels often and security around the president is always tight. Use this information to answer the second question. So again, we understand, the role of the president. We understand that it started to expand under Roosevelt. So we know that it makes sense that there may be, it needed to be reorganized. And a lot of government was reorganized in this time. A lot of the military was reorganized between the 1940s and 1950s, different offices and things. So, and that had to do a lot with expansion of government, dealing with crises, global crises and things like that. So, test taking. In a test taking situation, first make inferences, look at the answer choices to find the conclusion that can be drawn based on those inferences. So think about what you just read, take the question into account, and then find the answer. Edda, you want to read question 1 for us?
Okay, why was the executive office of the president created? A, to keep up with the increasing responsibilities of being president. B, to create more jobs in the federal government. C, to allow the president to push his or her agenda more clearly. Or D, to increase the number of advisors to the president. Is it A?
Yeah, A. So much going on, right, during that time. 1939, coming out of the Great Depression, getting ready to enter World War II. So much happening that there was just too much for a small staff to take on. So A for number one. Grace, could you read 2 for us?
Can I read later?
Yeah, number 2.
All right. Which of the following is the primary raising the office of presidential advance prepare remote sites for a president's arrival? A, they need to set up meetings. B, they must create the president's itinerary. C, they are gathering information to give to the president. And D, they are responsible for the president's safety. D?
Yeah, D, they're responsible for his safety. The president, office of presidential advance. Have any of you ever been near a president? Like, you know, when he's in his motorcade or anything like that? Like they shut down miles of road. And I was working this auditing job. I used to count inventory for convenience stores, and I lived in Virginia. And I was working in West Virginia one day. It was close to White Sulphur Springs, where the Greenbrier is, where every year the Republican leadership meets at the Greenbrier, this resort in West Virginia, and the president comes in when it's a Republican president. And it was George W. Bush. And I was counting this little convenience store, and I just finished up, and they're like, hold up, the president's coming. So it was right off the interstate, and I had to wait like another half hour before I could leave, just so his motorcade went by, and there goes the limo up the road about 20 miles per hour over the speed limit and up to Greenbrier. So it is, yeah. And the thing about that, that's another one. It's like every day, they're planning for his meetings if it's out offsite of the White House, and there's a whole staff that goes in and they investigate, and they take a look at an area, make sure it's safe, make sure there's nobody crazy there that's gonna. And this happens days before too. I mean, especially with really important things and big meetings and stuff, it's a whole system that goes on. Let's see, number 3. Tracy, you want to read the first paragraph for us? Maybe.
I would say I will.
Okay, go ahead, Etta.
Okay, the 21st Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which officially repealed.
I mute.
Oh, okay. I'll read the next paragraph.
Yeah, no. You go first.
Oh, okay. So the 21st Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which officially repealed prohibition. Yeah, prohibition. Prohibition grants individual states the right to regulate alcohol distribution and sale. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984, however, specifically requires all states to raise their minimum age for purchase and public possession of alcoholic beverages to people over age 21. States not complying face a reduction in highway funds under the Federal Highway Aid Act.
Tracy, you want to do the second one then?
Yes. U.S. Department of Transportation determined that all states now comply with the 1984 Act. The face public possession ethically, defined and does not apply to possession for the following established religious purpose when accompanied by a parent, spouse, or legal guardian, age 21 or older. Medical purpose when prescribed or administered by a licensed physician, pharmacist, dentist, nurse, hospital, or medical institution, in private clubs or establishment, and in the course of lawful employment by a duly licensed manufacturer, wholesaler, or retailer.
All right. And Sasha Case, are you available today? Can you read number 3 for us?
Yes, I can read. What conclusion can you draw for the reason the federal government needed to impose a reduction in highway funds on states that did not comply with the minimum drinking age? A, states are routinely rewarded financially for agreeing to national guidelines. B, states may set their own minimum drinking age, and the only the federal government had was financial. C, the federal government could save money by reducing highway funds. D, the federal government regularly fines states for not following its guidelines. Is it B?
Yeah, B. Yeah, so it was one of those things where state could set their own drinking age. And there wasn't a lot that, the federal government could do, but there are federal funds for, highway improvements and things like that. So they could, they could decrease the amount of funds that they get until the states got on board. So that's a little, way to influence that. So now, of course, across the board, the state, minimum drinking age is 21 to purchase alcohol. It's funny though, some of the we're saying about exemptions, right, for like religious purposes, or if you're with your parents, your guardian. And I just think it's funny. It's like a licensed physician or pharmacist, dentist, or nurse. I've never heard of anybody being prescribed alcohol for treating anything in modern medicine. If you look at old cold medicines from like the early 1900s, it was like, mostly alcohol. But yeah, it's kind of funny. And of course, I mean, that's the thing too, even with like, a lot of over the counter medicines, you can't purchase those until you're like 21. So B as in boy for 3. States set their own minimum drinking age, but the federal government can, take away certain funding depending on that. So number 4, Christiana, could you read number 4?
Based on the information on the based on the information in the passage, what can you conclude the meaning of imply to be? A, to admonish, B, to oppose, C, to compare, D, to please, what's that word?
Adhere.
Come again.
Adhere.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Comply. Is it C or A?
It's D. So adhere is to stick to, right? If you think of an adhesive like glue, but it can also mean to, when you're sticking with something, you're agreeing with it. So yeah, to comply is to agree, to go along, to stick together. So, and of course we can rule out, admonish and impose, because that would be the opposite. And compare, that's looking at context clues, right? So U.S. Department of Transportation determined that all states now comply with the 1984 Act. So, if the U.S. Department of Transportation is wanting states to comply, that's most likely means that they want them to go along with something. So you can start eliminating some of your other potential answers for that way. So yeah, 4D as in dog. And some new text here. Grace, could you take the first, go ahead and read the first two paragraphs.
Okay. The idea of levels of government, with the federal government supreme as it was for a half century, is fading, according to the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, a non-partisan research agency. What has emerged, said John Shannon, executive director of the federally financed agency, is a fend for yourself system. According to scholars on the subject, the shift of authority is due to a broad range of forces in play over the last few years, not only the deep budget cuts in federal domestic programs, but also the shift from a national economy based largely on manufacturing to an international economy based more on services and new technology. A new assertiveness on the part of the state government, that one were dormant and
parochial,
and the mounting national debt that has robbed the federal government of its role in initiating new social and economic programs.
Okay. Parochial, we're going to actually deal with that word here in a minute. As far as the definition, that's one of the questions, I believe. Sasha Gay, you want to read the last paragraph?
In the past, said John Kincaid, Director of Research for the Commission, the national economy was such a dominant force that state and local government felt powerless to act on their own. So they turned to the federal government for relief from economic distress. But now the U.S. economy is no longer able, even if willing, to bail out states and localities in every instance. Mr. Kincaid wrote in State Legislatures magazine, the U.S. economy is its state and local economies, and local economies must all compete against powerful foreign economic forces.
All right. Yeah. So what's going on there was an economic shift. So what he's trying to say there, with this sort of idea of fend for yourself system, the Reagan administration tended to be more conservative, and there wasn't a lot of money available for different types of state type programs. They dumped a lot of money into defense, but other than that, our economy was changing, where there was less manufacturing jobs. We were moving to more of a technology and service based type of economy. But it's largely saying it's like the states were kind of left up to their own after a lot of democratic programs and things in previous administrations to help their economies and their state and local economies. So number 5, Tracy, would you like to read number 5?
Yes. What was the overriding factor in the shifts of authority among levels of government that will happen in the late 1980s. A, checks and balances. B, separation of powers. C, economics. D, politics. Maybe B, separation of power.
So C, it was largely economic driven, as to why, you know, we had the shift in authority among levels of government, right? So there was at the top where it says fend for yourself sort of idea in the state system. Executive director of the Federally Financed Agency said, so levels of government, as it says, for a half century is fading. There's just less of a top-down approach. You know, we talked about that before. So there's less involvement at the federal level with the states. That's also a result of a Republican-held executive branch and legislative body, because, you know, they tend to look more for states, state power, right, and a smaller federal government. They preach that anyway. It doesn't always work that way in action, but that does, you know, seem to happen. So more state control of things, but less money available from the federal government. All right, and number 6, Christiana, would you read number 6 for us?
Number 6. With which of the following words can you replace in the word
parochial? There's our
parochial, and still maintain the meaning of the passage? A,
unsophisticated.
Okay, unsophisticated. B, worldly. C, broad-minded. D, religious. This C.
A, unsophisticated. Parochial does have, like, it can also mean religious, but it also means, you know, unsophisticated or narrow-minded or less complex. And again, sort of looking at our context. So it says, the sentence here, it says, but also the shift from a national economy based largely on manufacturing to an international economy based more on services and new technology. A new assertiveness on the part of state governments that once were dormant and parochial. So, you know, it's saying that these state governments, you know, were less sophisticated, right? That they didn't have quite the level of institutions to take care of this. So once dormant and unsophisticated would be another way you could look at that. The mounting national debt had, you know, robbed federal government of its role in initiating new economic social programs. So yeah, A for 6 there, unsophisticated. Okay, and now we have a brief history of NASA. Tracy, would you read the first paragraph for us?
Yes. A brief history of NASA. An act to provide for research into the problems of flight within and outside the Earth's atmosphere and for other purposes. With this symbol, enable the Congress and the President of the United States created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, on October the 1st, 1958, NASA's birth were directly related to the pressures of national defense. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in the Cold War. A broad contest over the ideologies and allegiance, allegiance,
Yeah.
allegiances of the non-aligned nations. During this period, space exploration emerged as a major area of contest and became known as the space race.
All right. Sasha Gay, you want to take the next paragraph?
During the late 1940s, the Department of Defense pursued research and rocketry and upper atmospheric sciences as a means of assuring American leadership in technology. A major step forward came when President Dwight D. Eisenhower approved a plan to orbit a scientific satellite as a part of the International Geophysical Year for the period July 1st, 1957 to December 31st, 1958, a cooperative effort to gather scientific data about the Earth. The Soviet Union quickly followed suit, announcing plans to orbit its own satellite.
All right. Etta, you want to read the next paragraph?
The Naval Research Laboratories Project Vanguard was chosen on September 9th, 1955 to support the IGY effort, largely because it did not interfere with high-priority ballistics missile development programs. It used the non-military Viking rocket as its basis, while an Army proposal to use the Redstone ballistic missile as the launch vehicle waited in the wings. Project Vanguard enjoyed exceptional publicity throughout the second half of 1955 and all of 1956, but the technological demands upon the program were too great and the funding levels too small to ensure success.
All right. Now I'm going to hit the last one here. So a full-scale crisis resulted on October 4th, 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite, as its IGY entry. This had a Pearl Harbor effect on American public opinion, creating an illusion of a technological gap, and provided the impetus for increased spending for aerospace endeavors, technical and scientific educational programs, and the chartering of new federal agencies to manage air and space research and development. So yeah, probably heard that term, the space race, before. It was another sort of idea of how we fought the Soviet Union. Remember the Cold War, the thing about the Cold War is that we never directly engaged the Soviet Union. One reason being is that we both had nuclear weapons, and that would have been really bad. And so, you know, we fought wars like the Korean War and the Vietnam War that were proxy wars. We fought them culturally, and we fought them scientifically. And there was a feeling at, you know, the late 50s that we, you know, technologically we wanted, you know, you want to be the most advanced country. That's also, you know, a way you win ideologically. And there was as it says here, it mentions, you know, there was a feeling that we were falling behind, particularly in our rocket technology and things. And we were not, you know, like we were maybe a month behind as far as developments and stuff. And part of that was like, you know, the technological advancements it takes to launch a rocket into space. And second, if you have that technology, well, we're putting, you know, nuclear bombs on rockets now. So it's no longer just being carried by airplanes. So if you can do that, you know, and shoot a missile, you know, across or into orbit, then that shows your level of technology, and that shows, you know, that you could also send a missile over, you know, across the Atlantic or the Pacific to, you know, hit a target in the US. And then Sputnik, there was a Sputnik craze when Russia launched that satellite into orbit, which had like some little bit of communication technology and everything. And it's, you know, only about this big. It's a little tiny thing. There was panic in the US because, you know, it's like, oh God, you know, they beat us. They've won the Cold War. We're a technological backwater. They've made this great accomplishment. And there's all kinds of craze, like people believing that Sputnik was reading their minds and all this stuff. But it also advanced a bunch of programs in our schools. Like there was a big push towards STEM programs in the late 50s for we need scientists, we need mathematicians. Started working with universities, the what's it called, the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Stanford. And you know, all these places were government funded to dive into technology. We got to beat the Soviets, you know. And of course, I guess we won, right? We put somebody on the moon. That was, you know, they never accomplished that, and then they fell apart. So anyway, so thinking about question 7 here, Christiana, you want to read question 7 for us?
Question 7. Which of the following conclusion can you draw based on the information? A. NASA was created for the primary purpose of defining the nation borders. B. What's that word?
Sputnik.
Sputnik gathered scientific data about Earth to be shared with the international community. C. NASA is the world's premier agency in space exploration. D. The general public plays a major role in deciding which government agency receive the most funding and support. Is it A?
It's D. So D is in dog. So yeah, the idea here is, you know, there's a lot going on as far as you know, public opinion and wanting to advance our technology. So you know, conclusion you draw here is that, you know, the general public plays a major role in those decisions with government agencies. If you think about it, you know, just like after 9/11, you know, we were worried about, you know, more terrorist attacks. So we get Homeland Security, we get money into, you know, preparing for that type of situation. And then of course today with COVID, right? You know, I mean, there's a good reason why we're spending a lot of money on you know, research and vaccines and things like that. But part of that is also because of public concern. So yeah, so 7 is D as in dog. And let's see here. Let's see, Etta, you want to read this one for us, number 8?
Okay. Equal justice under, it says from the website of the United States Supreme Court. Equal justice under law These words, written above the main entrance to the Supreme Court building, express the ultimate responsibility of the Supreme Court of the United States. The court is the highest tribunal in the nation for all cases and controversies arising under the Constitution or the laws of the United States. As the final arbiter of the law, the court is charged with ensuring the American people the promise of equal justice under law, and thereby also functions as guardian and interpreter of the Constitution. The unique position of the Supreme Court stems in large part from the deep commitment of the American people to the rule of law and to constitutional government. The United States has demonstrated an unprecedented determination to preserve and protect its written constitution, thereby providing the American experiment in democracy with the oldest written constitution still in force.
All right, go ahead and read the question for us too.
By whom is the Supreme Court granted its power? A, the people of the United States. B, the president. C, Congress. D, the president, cabinet. I think it's A.
Yep, A, the people of the United States, right? So here we go. All right. Let's see here. We've got, let's see. All right, 3 more. We'll go ahead and read this one, and we have a table to look at underneath here. So prior to signing the Constitution, the 13 original colonies had a system of government based primarily on state government. Talked about that, right? Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution. So although the colonies had formed a league of friendship under the Articles of Confederation, each state essentially governed itself. The people feared that living under a strong central government would be too similar to the way they lived under Britain's rule. They soon discovered, however, that the system did not work, so the Constitution was drafted. The Constitution explicitly defines the powers and limits of the federal or national government and clarifies the relationship between the national government and the state governments. This system, in which power is shared between the national and state governments, is known as federalism. So, looking at our table, right? Got our 4 columns here. So, exclusive powers of the federal government, exclusive powers of the state government, shared powers, and services typically provided by local governments. All right. So under that, exclusive powers of the federal government, only the federal government can use these powers. Print money, right? You get a dollar bill, whether you're in West Virginia or Texas, it has George Washington on it. Print money. Declare war. Of course, we only want the federal government to be able to declare war. Establish an army and a navy, enter into treaties with foreign governments, right? Idaho can't sign an agreement with North Korea. It has to be the federal government. Regulate commerce between states and international trade, which we know that was part of the Constitution, right? That was a big deal between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution, was who was going to regulate trade. And establish post offices and issue postage, right? If you mess with the U.S. Post Office, that is a federal offense. If you tamper with somebody's mail, that is a federal offense. And that's why they handle all, postal operation under the powers of state government. So these are state government powers: establishing local governments, issuing licenses, right? If you whether your tags on your automobile or your driver's license, that's state issued. If you move to a new state, you have to get new tags on your car, you have to get a new driver's license. It's a pain in the butt. Regulate interstate commerce. So, if I'm, trading, if I'm shipping something from, Illinois over here to Ohio, that's actually handled by state. Intrastate, meaning, I'm sorry, not interstate, intrastate. So if something's moving from Columbus to Cleveland, right? Intra meaning internal, inter meaning across. Conduct elections, right? The state Secretary of State is the head election official for every state. And they're the ones that with the last election, here we are, January 6th. You remember last year, there was a whole hullabaloo about the election. There was a lot of pressure put on the state secretaries of states because they handle elections. Georgia's Secretary of State, and I can't remember his name, had a very shady phone call with a certain president who was asking for like some number of votes. But that is always handled by the state. Every election, state controlled. Ratify amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Remember, I think it was 2/3 to ratify a amendment. Exercise powers neither delegated to the national government nor denied to the states by the U.S. Constitution. Right? I think that's the 10th Amendment, 9th or 10th Amendment. It says, any powers not specifically stated will be handled by the states. And then establish a state constitution, right? Each state has its own sort of version of a governing document, a constitution. Now we have shared powers, right? Things that both federal governments can do and state governments can do, right? We have courts, we have the Supreme Court, we have U.S. district courts, and then you have, state and local courts. Create and collect taxes. You pay school taxes. I pay taxes to Dublin City Schools because I live in Dublin. I pay state taxes and I pay federal taxes. Build highways, right? You can, the state builds local roads, local highways, and the federal government typically interstates, right? They help pay for that, the building and operation of interstates. Borrow money. A state can borrow money, the federal government can borrow money. Make and enforce laws. So, right, we have local law enforcement, you have Dublin police, you have state troopers, you have at every level, whether it's like a state, then a county level is typically a sheriff's office, and then you have like state troopers, and of course you have federal law enforcement. So like U.S. Marshals and the FBI, that's federal law enforcement. Those are shared powers. Spend money for the betterment of the general welfare of residents. So we have, state programs, right? And local. So Child Development Council of Franklin County is a good example. The Head Start program, that's it receives some federal money, but it is organized and operated at a local level, at a county level. But you have programs that are at a state level, and you have federal programs. All of that can be done at either a state level or a federal level. And then of course, transportation. So whether that's, like some form of mass transit. So, maybe train systems or subway systems and things like that, or you can have that at federal level too. And then local governments. Right, so your municipalities, your city governments, and things like that. These are powers that are delegated to them. Education, right? My daughter is in Dublin City School District. How many school districts are in Franklin County? There's a bunch. Those are all locally handled. Police, again, right? That's another one that's shared. We have them at local, we have them at county, we have them at state. But we all see whenever, if you're in the Columbus area, you see Columbus Police Department, you see, Dublin over here where I am. Fire's the same thing. You have, because the way fire emergencies have to be handled, you can't have that delegated by a state agency. It's much more effective at a local level, at a municipal level. Human services, again, any type of social type of programs, things like that. Public works, the same thing. There are, city workers that, improve roads, patch up potholes and things like that. They are employed by the city. Economic development, that's also in the purview of a local government. And parks and recreation, right? One of my favorite shows of all time is Parks and Recreation, the NBC show, and Ron Swanson and Leslie Knope, they work for the city of Pawnee. So it's a locally held, locally regulated and operated division. So thinking about all of our different levels of government and what powers go where. Tracy, number 9, could you read that one for us?
Yes, number 9. Which level of government is responsible for setting aside green spaces within communities? A, federal government. B, state government. C, local government. D, all government levels. What level? Green space within community. All government levels.
So local, right? So it's kind of weird because they don't, really define what a green space is, but that would be like a park, right? That would fall under that. So it would be up to local governments to create green spaces. That is C. C is in cat. Christiana, number 10, if you would, please. Maybe, maybe not. Etta, could you do number 10 for us?
Okay. Am I reading or is that the same?
Just read the question for us, number 10.
Okay. Why are some powers shared between the state and federal governments? A, to ensure that one level of government does not become more powerful than another level of government. B, because both levels of government need to have those powers to run their governments. C, so that the two levels do not interfere with each other. Or D, to be certain that all the responsibilities of government to its citizens are being met by all levels of government. D.
So B. And those are kind of similar, right? All responsibilities of government to its citizens are being met. But it's a little closer when you say both levels of government need to have those powers to run the government. So B is in boy there. And 11, Sasha Gay, could you read 11?
Why do the exclusive powers of the state governments include exercise powers neither delegated to the national government nor denied to the states by the U.S. Constitution? A, the states were worried about a federal government that was too powerful, so they made sure that they would be able to exercise rights not explicitly delegated or prohibited. B, the states gave up their right to enter into treaties with foreign governments in exchange for all other rights not explicitly delegated or prohibited. C, the states wanted to be certain they would ultimately have power over the federal government. Indeed, the states believe that federal government should only acquire new powers with the approval of two-thirds of the states.
So A is right. So this goes back to our prior knowledge, right? To some degree, we want to look at that. So we knew about when it came to the Articles of Confederation and just the long sort of held beliefs of not wanting an overly powerful federal government, right? That was the idea behind mostly behind the Democratic Republicans. So that is, basically put into the Constitution. So the states were worried about a federal government that was too powerful, and they made sure they were able to exercise rights not explicitly delegated. So that's, a little bit relying on some prior knowledge there and our text as far as going back and forth between the ideas that were in the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Okay, so 11 was A. That is everything for the workbook. Is there any questions on those Everybody get all of the answers. You all good there? So largely more practice, and we're getting ready to go back into language arts where we're going to be dealing with inferences and fiction. So we're actually sort of backtracking a little bit, which is good. I mean, this is one of those times, sometimes I get a little frustrated when we seem to hit the same things in the class over and over.